Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Let me just make sure the recording is going here. Okay, recording is working. Very good. All right. Okay. Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. This is an ambitious presentation. Adam, Jesus, and you, the two trees. Let me tell you what I'm planning to do. You see the table here? That's all we're going to be talking about. Okay. So firstly, the format is I will make the presentation. It's just this table. Currently, all of these 5 columns are covered up. I'm going to slowly unveil them one by one. I want to, so I'll make the presentation. After the presentation, so please use this advanced tool of pen and paper to keep track of all the questions you have, all the comments you have. Most people in the audience are much more familiar with the Bible than I am, okay? I've been studying the Bible only the New Testament. I've focused only on the New Testament. My understanding of Old Testament is atrocious. I think I understand the New Testament maybe 2%, 3%, something like that, okay? So my knowledge is limited. At the same time, what I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to identify things as clearly as possible. This is a particularly odd presentation because it is not just about the concepts from the New Testament. It is looking at the Genesis story, the Garden of Eden, from the perspective of the New Testament, and then talking about the meaning in terms that can be understood by anybody outside a religious context, okay? So we're going to be talking about the two trees. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. Then we're going to be talking about this concept of integration of spirit and matter. And this is the heart of the issue. This is where all the disagreements of people are. As best as I understand it, the way to approach this is to see how spirit is integrated into matter, or how form is shaped by the function. So we are looking at functionated form. Life which has spirit in it and matter in it. Spirit shaping the matter. So this union of spirit and matter, integration of spirit and matter, that is the crucial idea. This is the Aristotelian idea. The Platonic idea holds that these two things are apart. This entire presentation is based on the integration of spirit and matter. Okay, that is the base of it. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the two trees. We're going to be talking about how it applies to integration of spirit and matter. And we're going to be talking about each of the concepts. What does each of these columns mean? Okay, so let's get started. We will start in the Garden of Eden. So this yellow is the Garden of Eden before the fall. This is Adam after the fall. Now, the first challenge I had is to understand these two trees. And I found that the names that are given to it in the Genesis story, I did not find them useful. So I looked at them from the New Testament perspective. Now, in the New Testament, in the Gospel of John, we are studying Gospel of John. So one of the things I wanted to, of one point I wanted to make here was about the metaphors. New Testament again and again uses physical things to refer to spiritual things. In chapter 4, when Jesus is talking to the woman from Samaria, he says, I will give you living water. And she says, oh, good. I don't have to keep coming to the well again. And he says, no, 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 that's not what it is. Spiritual water, living water, is basically the fountain of love you have in your heart for God. He talks to his disciples about, he says, I am the bread of life. This is, I think, in chapter 5 or chapter 6. After he has fed all these people, and they're very happy with the fact that he has managed to feed them with just few loaves. They are very impressed and they flock to him. He says, you are happy that your stomachs are full, but I'm the bread of life. Just like physical body requires water, requires bread for its sustenance, the spirit requires something for its sustenance. I am the bread of life, which makes your spiritual life possible, that holds together, that expresses your spirit. He's the ideal, he's the way. That's what our spirit needs. He talks about life in the same chapter. He says, I'm the bread of life that will give you life. And it will help you turn away from death, so you don't have to live in death. So that even the terms life and death are not material terms. They are spiritual terms. They are saying that when you are living a life in accordance with your ideal, in accordance with God, in accordance with the right way, you are living. That is true living in a spiritual level. When you go away from that, that is dying. So life and death is defined in terms of spirit. The second tree, the tree of life, is really tree of spiritual life. And that's really the heart of the Garden of Eden. I had the hardest time of figuring out what's the best thing to call this tree from which Adam ate. Because eating of that did not give him knowledge. It was his first act of choice. Let's look at the Eden, what it looks like. Firstly, in Eden, he had no responsibility. He was like a child. The best way of thinking about it is that he was in the womb, completely surrounded by life-giving things. He didn't have to worry about anything. He didn't have to decide anything. He didn't have to choose anything. God was right there. He would be roaming around in the garden with him. It was bliss. It was a perfect integration of spirit and matter, which was pre-existing. What is the meaning of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? That is the first choice he makes. It is an act of will. And understanding of difference between good and evil is not a passive thing. It's about taking responsibility for your actions. So it is the tree of choice. It is the tree of will. If it is a tree of responsibility, responsibility to shape your actions, responsibility to shape the material world. He ate from it. God had told him, don't eat from this tree because you will surely die. The Satan told him, no, you're not going to die. What does that mean? Satan is talking purely about the material things, and God is talking about spiritual things. At the spiritual thing, at the spiritual level, Adam is with God. He is in Eden. The spirit is alive. The tree is there. The tree is not, it's external to him. Okay. That's internal and external is another theme that we are going to look at. Generally in Old Testament, a lot of things are external, which are internalized in the New Testament. So what did God mean when you say that, if you take responsibility, he's a child, he's not ready to take the responsibility. Still, he says it's like a 2-year-old saying no for the first time. He's a child who's discovered the power of choice, yet not discovered how to take the responsibility for that choice. And what is responsibility? Full responsibility. That means to be able to do this in the right way, which will go towards the highest good, that integrates spiritual life. What God is saying is that if you take responsibility when you're not ready and act, you will lose the connection with the Spirit. You will lose the connection with God. You will be cast out of Eden, and there will be a barrier between you and spiritual life or pursuing the ideal, because you do not have the ability now of doing that. Now, looking at it from another perspective, this is not a fall. This is actually the birth of man. This is birth of will, birth of taking responsibility. He has not figured out yet how to actually act responsibly, responsibly, but he has chosen to do that. And yes, the automatic goodness which is there in the womb, that is there in the Garden of Eden, is lost, but he has gained something. He has gained the power of choice, power of making decisions. It's a long road ahead, because what the right thing is not automatic. And because he doesn't have the ability to figure that out, he's away from this tree of spiritual life. In Garden of Eden, let's look at the integration of spirit and matter. In Garden of Eden, spirit and matter are one. Here, after the fall, he's out of Garden of Eden. He's dealing with material things, and he has lost touch with God, with the spirit. So the integration is broken. What is the meaning? Meaning of Eden is bliss. Now this has very powerful echoes in us. We still seek this integration of spirit and matter, almost effortless. And responsibility clashes with this. That is the state we are in. Let's go to the next step. Folks, keep track of all the questions you have. Many of you know this much better than I do, and this is particularly true about the column coming up because it is about the Old Testament, and I would appreciate any feedback that you have about what I'm about to say. The next big step is Moses. Okay, again, this is the weakest part of this entire presentation. So here, Adam is a wanderer. He doesn't know what's the right thing. What is it that Moses does? I'm going to keep it short because my knowledge here is very limited. The core of what Moses does is that God gives him law of how you should act. And that law is the core idea. Now, this is indirect. So people don't have direct connection with God, direct connection with spirit. Few people do. These are the prophets. But people in general, the progeny of Adam, the best thing that they have at this stage is law. And there is an integration. Law is actually trying to implement the functioning of spirit in matter to some extent, at least at the level of do no harm. So you're saying, try not to destroy things. And that's what I see this. If you look at the responsibility, law is about taking your responsibility in the external world, in the outside world. The connection with spirit is indirect. The integration of spirit and matter is only partial. You're saying, if I follow the law, I will not destroy the spirit of other people. I will not act against it. That's how I see this. Now we come to the next stage. God so loved the world that he sent his only son. Now this is a dramatic step forward because it's now God on earth. It is 100% God, 100% man in the individual, the integration of spirit and matter. That's what Jesus is. Jesus is the way. He's the ideal. The responsibility is now not just outer, but inner. And spirit is back directly on earth in the person of Jesus. And then after his death, through the Holy Spirit, which is love of God in your own heart. Expressing then as love of others, but love of God in your own heart, love of the right, love of truth in your own heart. That's what Holy Spirit is. So that's what Jesus brings back. And you can see that it has become internalized. You see conflicts of Jesus with some of the ritualistic followers of Moses who are trying to ritualistically follow the law. And what Jesus is telling them, that law is based on spirit. And you do not see the Spirit when it's standing right in front of you. You're trying to pursue the law, which was an expression, physical expression of Spirit, and you're losing the Spirit. So New Testament, Jesus is all about internalizing these things. And he says, I am the bread of life. So in terms of responsibility is not just, so at this stage, in Eden, there was no responsibility. Adam shirked his responsibility. He blamed, even when God found out, he first says, she made me do it, passing the blame. And then she said, she who you gave me made me do it. So it starts by just shirking the responsibility. Following the law is all about accepting the outside responsibility in the external world. Jesus is all about internalizing this to loving the good, loving the truth, loving the ideal, and following it. So it is internalizing of responsibility. So it is both inner and outer as a result. There's beautiful distinctions here. So here, Jesus says this is like a servant following the orders of a master because he's afraid what would happen to him if he did not. So it's the motivation by fear. This is a motivation by love. It's the love of the good, love of God, love of the ideal that drives you. So this is love of a son for a father. This is a fear of a servant for the master. That's on responsibility. Now let's look at the tree of spiritual life. Jesus says, I am the bread of life. If you eat this bread, which is a spiritual bread, so that the ideal becomes a part of you, that you are that, then you will have life or spiritual life. He uses that interchangeably. So he is the tree. Now, the most dramatic expression of this, of combination, is the meaning of Jesus himself, which is crucifixion followed by resurrection. So accepting the responsibility of you having gone away from the right thing, that is all about redemption of sins, and pursuing, following the path that will get you towards it. So it is dying of your lower nature, which is not consonant. So let's put it in terms of Bhagavad Gita and Tao Te Ching. In terms of Tao Te Ching, it is living from the center. It is giving up the names, the things, 10,000 things that are taking you away from the center and falling back into the center and acting from it. In Bhagavad Gita, it is the principle of Atma, the divine spark in you, focused, the concept of Sthita Prajna, which we discussed, where you're firmly seated at the core of your being and you're acting from it. And as we saw in chapter 4, this Friday, it's the same principle, that the fire of your Atma, of you standing in the Atma, burns all your karma. because they become irrelevant, because you are now you're acting in accordance with the highest ideal. So that combination of taking full responsibility and following the right path, leading to spiritual life. So in chapter 6, it's put very beautifully. He says, you have eternal life now. Okay, what does eternal life now? See, I really like that term, because it's not about something that is going to happen later. It is that eternal factor which is there, the Tao operating in you now. God in you. Atma being the same as Brahma and acting from it. And you have that now. So it's something that is eternal, which is in you now. It's a profound idea. And that's what this is. Integration of spirit and matter. The best phrase is Jesus is 100% God and 100% man. And what is the meaning? It's the idea. Another way of thinking about it, so look at these 4 concepts: bliss, responsibility, law, and ideal. So if you think of yourself, so just think of this outside of the Bible context, just using the ideas from philosophy and psychology. Actually, we will come to it in the next slide after I've finished the 5th one. So what comes next? It's the city of God. Because if you look at it here, the integration has been achieved in the individual. The next step is to achieve it in community. So for example, Jesus has it in his person. This transition in the Gospel of John starts with chapter 13 onwards, when Jesus starts by washing the feet of his disciples and says, the way I love God, I love you. And I want you to love each other as I love you. So it is transferring of that. I really love the way in which the Indian thought deals with it. Namaste, when you say namaste, you're saying the God in me greets the God in you. That is profound, because that serves as a base for an interaction which is so much deeper, so much holistic than an interaction that is based on law. Law is fantastic, but this is even deeper. Law is about doing no harm. This is about establishing a win-win relationship. Law is saying, don't do win-lose. This is about win-win at a very deep level, at the spiritual level, at the emotional level, at the intellectual level, at every level. So that is the direction and what he's trying to do. And that's what the conception of church is in the New Testament. It is a community that is held together by love. The commandment he gives, love one another. It's a community that is held together. It's the same love that you have towards God. It's the same love that you have towards ideal, made express in a community context. So just like this is inner and outer, this is inner and outer in a society. As far as responsibility goes, everybody around you has it. Everybody in the community has it. Just like you're pursuing the highest spiritual life, you're doing the same thing in the community context. Just like there is this integration in an individual, but you have to realize at this stage during Jesus, though the integration is there in Jesus, the integration is not there between Jesus and the world. The world is still going in the opposite direction. And that's the reason the world crucifies him. This is a time where the ideal and people pursuing the ideal is revealed in a community. The concept here is love. So that is the progression of these five. Now, this is not a story. The question for you is, where are you in this table? Where do you live? Are you here? Are you here? Are you here in the green area? Are you in the blue area? Are you in this gray area? Where are you? And what do each of these columns mean to you? We have all of these within us to some extent. And different people have different, different levels at which they live most of the time. So where are you? That's the most profound question, because now let's use some of the common, psychology terms. This, going back to the yellow area, is like going back to the womb. Okay, so first let's look at it in stages of development. This is the womb. Adam is when you're born and you become two and you learn to say no. You're a teenager. You don't have the full responsibility. You're petulant. You have current things that you are interested in. They don't add up to anything. Okay, your ability to transform this world, which is green, you don't have much of that. Then you become an adult. You are at this level, green level. Okay, you still don't know what exactly you should be doing. You do not have a full moral compass. You have some sense of the law of what you should not do. Okay, that is better than the red, but not quite there. This blue is when you have an internal compass. You have an internal ideal. You've grasped the ideal for yourself and you follow it, not because you're afraid of what someone else will say, but because you yourself love it. And then the gray area is when you can actually build a community. With that, you can interact with other people, transmit that love to other people, get that love from other people, learn from that, and build a community. So that's this, looking at it from the point of view of stages of life. You can look at it from some of the psychological concepts. So for example, Jordan Peterson has a beautiful concept of future self. That is this concept of ideal. You are here somewhere. You have your material life, which is the green. You have your emotional life, which sometimes is consistent with things, sometimes is not. You have a desire to have a vision of going back where everything is together. And you want it effortlessly. Actually, it's possible to get here, but it is actually beyond this, beyond the gray part. You have to do a lot in order to get there. But we have a tendency of wanting to just go back. Not possible. This ideal is the same as the word. You have to spell it out. You have to make it explicit. It is also that explicitness is what also allows you to build a community. You have to be able to communicate your ideal to other people, to have common values, common goals that you can work towards. So this is my take on this sequence. Now I'm going to actually keep sharing the screen, and so we can talk about this. Let me go ahead and make sure that everybody can chat now, and I will also allow people to unmute. So this is the end of my presentation. It took about 35 minutes. All right, so now I would like both comments and questions. So you can make a quick comment if you want and ask whatever questions. I will take any questions. I've put this entire table, everything that we have talked about is right here. I'm happy to talk about any aspect that you want to talk about. I'm also eager to hear whether this is clear, whether it is confusing, any thoughts that you might have. So let's start with Evanik, followed by Abram. I'm going to listen very carefully to what you're saying, and I will go ahead and give me just a second here. I will go ahead and try to listen as carefully. I will respond to whatever I can as I think about it, but I will keep track of what you're saying, and I might respond to what you're saying a little bit later on. Okay. So try to keep, we're trying to cover a very large area. So but I want to hear whatever you have to say. So I really appreciate any thoughts. So we'll start with Evanik, followed by Abram. Evanik.
So I have one quick comment and one question. When you were talking about Adam is like a 2-year-old and he loses connection and taking responsibility when he's not ready yet. The thing I thought about too is when we ask God for something that we're not ready for, and then we get upset when God says no. It's like a parent and a 2-year-old. 2-year-old wants something that's dangerous, like the 2-year-old wants to put something metal in the electrical socket, and the parent tells them no, and they throw a temper tantrum. That's like us and God. We ask for something, God's like, no, you're not ready, and we throw a temper tantrum. So I thought that was interesting. And then I have a question. When you say it's not possible to go backwards in the table, can you explain that a little more?
It's so in one sense, we have all of these things operative in us all the time. So we have elements of this all the time. What I mean, can't go back in the sense you cannot have this pure bliss without taking the responsibility, without following the law, without having the ideal, without love. So what we get after all of it is an integration of spiritual and material, but it is far more complex than what we started out with. What people desire is a far more kind of simple, almost like a retrogression to a simpler state. That does not work, but you get something similar to that of a much more complex nature. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does.
Okay, next, thank you. Next up is Abram, followed by David. Abram.
Thank you, Srikan, for your quest for the word of God and other understanding. My take on the Adam is a bit different from your interpretation, but I don't know. I have to confess it. This is how I think of it.
Go ahead.
I don't think Adam was like a child or teenage stage. I see him as archetype almost. He was brilliant. God asked him God observed how Adam gives each name to different living things. So the difference is that when we look at the many figures in the Bible, like Abraham, David, and great figures, let's say, they all disobeyed at one point of their life. So according to the Bible, the concept of good and evil is not the way we typically think. Disobedience is sin in the Bible. People don't like it, many people. And also in the Bible, God is Jehovah, the capital God. God talks about different spirits, but God is very stern about that. Christianity is monotheism. It's not like let's live together and let's make a peace. It's not approach at all. In the Old Testament, whoever worship different spirits, God specifically asked to kill them, annihilate them. It's very violent, actually, according to contemporary perspective. Another thing is Jesus. I agree. He took care of a lot of people who in suffering physically and not respected, let's say poor. But at the same time, he said this one, I came to the world not to give peace, but to give sword, knife. It's a metaphor. So lastly, I'll read a few pages. Just the phrase. This is Old Testament. For as through the one man's disobedience, the many were made sinners. This is Romans. Even so, through the obedience of the one, the many will be made righteous. For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and insubordination is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord. Yeah, that was some of my thought. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Abram. I'm going to just comment on one thing, and then I will go to the next person. Many of the themes I'll keep coming back to. One of the core parts of pursuing the good is to say no to the bad and to destroy the bad within us. So it definitely involves getting rid of the negative, both in us and about us. So I completely agree with that. Next up is going to be David, Jason, and Douglas. David.
Yes, thanks, Shrikant. Yeah, I just want to, Abraham, I think you said Old Testament, Romans is New Testament. It's a very interesting framework that you're creating here. I'm still trying to, fully integrate it. But I guess my main comment about the Old Testament, there's clearly a, Eden and post-Eden, timeline behavior, foundation in the Hebrew Bible. I think that it's I understand this structure that you're trying to create in these different this evolution that you're expressing. It feels a little bit forced to me in the Old Testament, or at least, I don't know, maybe I would, instead of trying to assign this, at least it's also a little bit strange to me. What I'm saying is, I think what's confusing a little bit is that you start at the beginning and the ending with time periods, and you have people in the middle. And it might be clearer if you just talked about it in terms of phases or periods or times, and not trying to, maybe Jesus, but Adam and Moses seems a little bit forced to try to describe these components in terms of an individual, at least in the Hebrew Bible. There's a lot can be talked about it, but it's less of a single individual story driven. Though there is discussion about Abraham and how much there's that whole stream of story, and the Moses, and it's clearly very important. But Jesus is much more central in the way, and obviously the New Testament is a very different approach to the story, or a different sort of focus as a gospel. In all the books, the epistles, all these other things, than how the Old Testament, the Torah, is structured. But I think that it might make more sense to, at least with the Old Testament, to talk about it in terms of societal evolution, because I think that's part of what's going on. If you look at, again, not to make this too fine grained, of Abraham and Moses and David and these different, but it's more of a society itself, in the same way that one could think about the Greeks and the whole discussion we've had previously about the bicameral mind, and how the way that those stories were presented. So it may be more just this evolution of the Eden period, and then the post-Eden period, and then this exilic, the exile from Egypt period, and how the entire people, the whole concept of how they were relating to God, as opposed to trying to assign it to a specific person. And then the Jesus, that biblical, or the period of time. That's just a comment so far.
Excellent. Thank you, David. So firstly, I want to say that my understanding of Old Testament is not very good. And clearly this diagram, the acuity or the precision with which it deals with the Old Testament is much lower than these other areas, because I'm coming at it from the New Testament perspective. Secondly, the entire, and there is a very complex societal evolution during the Old Testament, and that's definitely not captured here. The only thing, I'm focusing on just one aspect of the Old Testament, and that it is about external as opposed to internal. The emphasis is external in the Old Testament. I see the emphasis has moved from external to internal in the New Testament. So that was one point that I wanted to make. Second, consequently, the ideal has moved from law, societal ideal, to internal ideal. It has moved from rituals, which are external physical things that you do, to how you feel and love in your heart. So there is this movement from outside to
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree.
That is the only thing I'm focusing on in this, because it's just like a way of, it's trying to cover all of this entire time period in one swath. And we can definitely take the green part and break it up. And there is,
I didn't mean that. What I'm saying, sorry to interrupt, is that I completely understand that you have this concept, this evolution. I think it's great to describe this evolution in this biblical framework, and then, as you're saying, applying it to human beings themselves, and where do we sit in this the spectrum. So I think that's excellent. That's great. I'm just noticing
I agree with you that, like, as I said, I don't know the Old Testament. I have not read it, and there is a lot. The only way I have looked at the Old Testament is when I've used it as a references, as kind of the background for the New Testament. That I've done some of, but not quite. So absolutely, I look forward.
I'm just mentioning that I see here that you start at that Eden is a non even corporeal entity, and the city of God is non-corporeal entity, and then in the middle you have these Adam, Moses, Jesus. I'm just saying that it might make more sense, or at least one way of looking at it is to have it consistent labels, or that if you had time periods instead of people.
Okay,
just to suggest, just
no,
one,
sure. No, the thing is that it's very deliberate, and I'll tell you why I have done this way. What happens is that Adam, Jesus, forget about for Moses for a moment. Adam and Jesus, see, what happens is that we think of these issues in terms of individuals. So even when we are looking at things internally, thinking of them in terms of individual people is incredibly powerful in our psychology. So that's why originally I had only Adam and Jesus. So another way of looking at it is that you can cover up the last two, just look at Adam and Jesus, and that will tell you a lot. And that is the most moving part. Moses is an intermediary that comes in. The third point I want to make, so first thing is that focus on the individuals. Second is Adam and Jesus gives a very, very deep, it makes a very deep point about responsibility and ideal. And that's, it's directly about the two trees of tree of the knowledge of good and evil and tree of life. And this personified is the most, I think it's the most powerful part of everything that I've said so far. Now, Moses is like an intermediary figure, and I've chosen Moses because of the law, that he got the law. Now, the interesting thing is that why have I bracketed these two things, these individuals with societies? Okay, this is like a society, this is like a context, and this is also context. I think it's primarily because that we are social beings and we have to integrate how we fit into our context. Otherwise, the integration is not complete. I'm saying that there is an integration here. This is almost like our primate nature. This is what life is like, which is conscious. Like Adam and Eve were not even conscious that they were naked. They were not conscious. They were not self-conscious. This is almost the animal state. And this is the ideal of what civilization looks like, where there is a win-win interaction. So that's why I have put it that way. Next up is going to be Jason, Douglas, Madhav, David Miller, and David Norton. Jason.
Well, yeah, a quick question. And when you put the city of God, I'd like to know what you mean. You mean the St. Augustine, or you mean the established Catholic Church?
I mean, from Revelations. Okay,
Revelation.
Or Jesus talks about the kingdom of God, a place where the entire principle of how he is saying we should be, there is an entire community of people. Another way of thinking about it is that it's the same as the church, concept of church in the Gospel of John, but church on earth, where there is this entire community, and it is dramatized in the Revelation as city of God. So that's what I'm referring to.
Okay.
Thank you. Next up is Douglas and Madhav. Douglas.
Yes, thank you for doing this. This is great. I think we would have to go to the 1st and 2nd century and look at the Bible then, and you will see a lot to what's going on now. But there are differences, okay? And that would be the first. If you really want to know the New Testament, go to the 1st, 2nd century. The big thing here, it's good what you're trying to do, is that we have to, we have to understand where, okay, in my opinion, where the Bible, or where, okay, let's go and what you say, where Jesus stood and where these different people stood. And there's another book, if you're really interested, it's called The Lost Tales of Jesus, The Lost Wisdom of Jesus. Very interesting set of books that you would find very good. Okay, here's what I want to know from you, okay, in your opinion. Okay. Talk about religiosity versus spirituality. Can you define, or can you explain how you look at it from that point?
Absolutely. I'll put that as a question. I'll do that towards the end.
Okay.
Let me focus on the questions directly about this presentation first. And the quick answer to that is that religiosity gets dominated by rituals, where people are trying to actually let other people know that they are religious. They are trying to follow things in a rote way, through habitual way. The spirituality is actually having the Spirit. This is the same complaint that Jesus had with the Pharisees about the Sabbath, of saying you're being religious by not following the Sabbath, but will you not do things which are appropriate to Spirit even on a Sabbath? So that's the same point was brought up in the Bhagavad Gita yesterday, where where Krishna was saying that no matter how much religious you are on the outside, like there was this beautiful thing where you're using rosaries in order to say that you're religious. You're going through pilgrimages in order to say that you're religious, but you don't have it in your heart and in your mind. So it is internalizing of the religiosity, as that is what spirituality is. So that's what I would say. Next up is going to be Madhav, followed by David Miller and David Norton. Madhav.
Hey, before I ask the question, I want to preface my knowledge in the Bible is kind of shallow. But when I think of Jesus Christ, I think of two different things. The first thing is the loving nature. And then the second thing that I think of is him being the ultimate ideal, the ultimate judge. So there's a distinction between the love and the ideal, which can be scary. As a judge, it could be also scary. So how do you reconcile those two different ideas in the same prophet?
Wonderful. Excellent question. And that's a very deep question. That's a question of justice and mercy, justice and love. And he has both of those. So there is justice, and it's very interesting. Like, for example, much of the Old Testament is mostly focused on justice. What Jesus does is that he does justice. At the same time, there is redemption possible. There is mercy possible. There is grace possible. So what he's saying is that if you commit yourself to doing the right thing, you have the ability to save yourself at any point of time, because you have the power of choice in you. You have a power to take responsibility for your spiritual life. And if you do that, sins are forgiven. So there is justice, and on the top of that, there is mercy and grace. So it's a very deep point, and one that very much distinguishes the New Testament and the Old Testament. Excellent question. Next up is David Miller, followed by David Norton. David Miller, what do you think?
Well, I very much like your diagram, your presentation. Look, I'd like to assert that, in my opinion, most of us are stuck in the Moses phase. We're stuck with this utter complete reverence for the law. Now you could ask, well, why is this? It's because, this is a Christian civilization in which we're socially conditioned into, we're indoctrinated into, we're brainwashed into. Now, what's the law that we're brainwashed into within this context? It's mainstream Christianity. It's Nicaea. It's this, well, the way you expressed it is, Jesus is fully human and fully divine. Now, a lot of the Christian varieties, the umpteen dozen Christian varieties back in the early days, didn't accept this at all. But because we're brainwashed into this utter reverence for the law, we accept this as Christianity. And this is just the viewpoint of the particular category of Christianity that the Roman emperors chose. In other words, the rulers, the law says that is Christianity. And yet, for example, the adoptionist Christians, this category, containing umpteen varieties, said that Jesus was purely human and never became a god. Now, the opposite extreme are known as the Docetists, in which they claim that Jesus is pure spirit. He's divine. He's a god and never became a human. Now, admittedly, you know, the Pharisees, Moses, the law, if you want to put it that way, it's a brilliant compromise. The Nicene Creed says he's both, fully human and fully divine. And that's what we're brainwashed into. That's what we're revering. And because we're so much in this Moses phase, how many of us have had the guts to look it up on the net? We've now got the internet, and you can look up all these varieties.
Thank you.
Now,
Let me go ahead and respond.
Now, one final point. Just because we murdered all these varieties of Christianity by supporting the Roman emperors doesn't mean that they maybe were the true Christianity. So therefore, we're stuck in the Moses phase.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Let me respond. This is the most, firstly, thank you for the, this is a great point. I think we are stuck in most people are in the Moses phase. What I would say is that the heart of my understanding and heart of what I think is the value of Christianity to me comes from the integration of spirit and matter. All the schools that you mentioned are schools that are focused on dichotomy. Their premise behind that is Platonic, that there are two worlds. There is a world of spirit and world of matter. A whole bunch of people are saying, no, Jesus is just matter. They say, no, Jesus is just spirit. Both of them are against the principle of integration of spirit and matter. I would say that, it's the old conflict between Aristotle and Plato. All the variations that you're talking about are Platonic, and they just select, they're Platonic in the sense that they accept that spirit and matter are completely different, and then they just bicker about which one they love. And I think, my sense, my understanding of philosophy is that this view of Christianity, of Jesus being 100% God and 100% man, is the only useful part of Christianity. And there are all kinds of philosophers, just like, and by the way, I've looked at even the history of Catholic Church. The range of opinions held on religion is almost as large as the range of philosophies held by philosophers. So the reason I'm focused on this is for three following reasons. Number one, I think this integrates with what I think is true, that we are beings of spirit and matter, that form follows function. This is, so I have it from many, many different ways of looking at it. This integration of spirit and matter. This is Aristotelian way of thinking. This is a way of thinking in terms of contraries as opposed to contradictories. That is Aristotle's way of thinking. That is Aquinas' way of thinking. This is the way of saying that world is a dance of yin and yang, not two separate things, but a dance going back and forth, shaped by that. This is the way of the center, thinking about the center and the periphery in Tao Te Ching. Center not despising the periphery, but saying that that is periphery and center also exists and periphery also exists. And they have a certain relationship. So that's why I started out by saying that this integration of spirit and matter is the foundation of everything I'm saying. And that's my understanding. And it so happens that it is completely consistent with the traditional view of Christianity. Next up is going to be David Norton. David.
Yeah, Shrikant, I think you did a beautiful job putting this thing together. You know, from the point of the fact that, you know, in the Garden of Eden, before the, you know, they chose the knowledge of good and evil, treating that as like a child. I personally believe that's very, very true. And the whole thing is an example of the process that we sort of all go through. You know, and even sometimes I look at Eve as like, you know, being the mother, representing the mother of all of us, and in her own way becomes like an instructor, because I think most people are closest to their mother more than anybody else. And therefore is a person that we actually learn from. But the thing is, her being tempted by the serpent, you know, and being transferred, to me, that's symbolic of the world. When we're born into this world, period, we're born into so many different variations of so many different things that, you know, we have no order to it. But the thing is, the way you have this laid down, it really brings an order to the spirit. And you use integration, but I've written different things on it too. I use the word synchronization of the same thing that you got there. And as far as Moses is concerned, I think Moses is key in this whole thing. And the reason I say that is because Moses is the one that actually first wrote down all of the stuff that came before him, because before Moses, everything was transferred on an oral basis, verbally, from one generation to another. And what Moses did is he actually documented it. And when you stop and think about, when I stop and think about this, and the Adam and Eve story and the knowledge of good and evil, the thing is, even when God is mentioned up until Jesus Christ, and these people have a wrong perception of God, even referring to God, is that the real God, the one that synchronizes with Jesus in the Garden of Eden? And I think that that needs to really be explored a lot in order to find that out, you know. So I think that Moses, when he came along and gave us the 10 commandments, you know, if we take a look at the 10 commandments, not as a community to, you know, to declare them on other people, but as an individual in a way to live, there's tremendous substance in them. But I think that Jesus came along, and after Moses, well, he naturally, because Moses, God prophesied Jesus through Moses, because Jesus says, if you don't believe in Moses, you can't believe in me. So the thing is, there's a strong connection between those two. And, you know, I think it's very important to understand that and see where that connection actually is. You know, like I say, I think that you did a beautiful job of putting this together, and the whole result ends up coming out, like you say, as a community of people that, you know, if you follow the things that Jesus teaches us, you know, the thing is, one thing that's not mentioned too much is the book of Matthew, and Matthew's other name was Levi. And if you look at what was handed down, the law came down through the Levites. And actually, Matthew was the one that gives the law. And it's not compromised very much that I can see it all from back then, because it really synchronizes with a lot of John. And the thing is, the law is very important, not to memorize it, to push it upon other people, but to have that law living within inside of each individual to create the community. And to me, as far as I'm concerned, one of the laws that Jesus has come up with that is really important and bears witness of everything is the thing is where he says, seek and you shall find, ask and the door will be open to you. This here is primary to any kind of understanding that we can have of Jesus, Moses, Adam, Eve, or Garden of Eden, and also the city of God, which is an agreement of the beauty of the love that we have that is generated from Jesus Christ. And it goes back to the Garden of Eden. That's what I got to say.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, David. I have several comments. First one, I agree with you that actually the basis in Old Testament of New Testament that's a amazingly rich topic. And that's something that, I need to learn a lot about, because I see the echoes. I have friends who know the Old Testament. You yourself have quoted out of the Old Testament, supporting the things in the New Testament. And I think that's very powerful to understand that Old Testament is like version 1 of what the version 2 is. And version 2 depends on the version 1. And it depends in a far more complex way than I have put this together. I think what I've gotten is some essentials. So for example, the focus on the external versus internal, I think in general is true. But when you look at some of the Psalms, I mean, those are very much, there's a tremendous internal life to it. So that's one thing. I look forward to exploring that in our discussions on.
Can you give me just
Douglas, please don't unmute yourself. We can hear you talking. The next one, so I look forward to exploring that, and as we explore Gospel of John. Next point I want to make is this point about ask and you shall receive. Okay, I think that's a very large point. The point is that, just a second here. The point is that again and again, this sequence of tree of responsibility or act of will, and then choosing the right thing, that is always the sequence. So even when Jesus wants to give something to somebody, he first asks, do you want to be healed? Do you want the water? Only if, and then say, yes, I want, I ask for it. Only when people can ask, people ask. That is the act of choice, act of responsibility of saying, I choose this. Only then you can have the ideal. You can have the grace only if you ask for it. So that's a huge point. And the last one other point that you made is that having that the right behavior in you, living in you, as opposed to it living as laws outside of you that you're trying to conform to, versus it being in your heart, both the love and the knowledge being in you, and you're acting from it. That's what City of God is about. Excellent points. Folks, if you have questions or comments, go ahead and type exclamation mark. Next is Maritza.
So Shrikant, looking at this table here, I really, my favorite is the last line, the meaning, right? Mm-hmm. I really like those 5 things. I can almost see them as stepping stone for us as we work towards our own self-improvement. My thought is that love would come before the ideal, but that's just my thinking. I would think that as the individual, we have to find the love so that then we can work towards making a strong community. And it's through that community where we would find the ideal. Just kind of the way I would see it.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. I mean, this is the sequence. I mean, those are kind of one word kind of capturing of it. Let me give you the full context here. So the way in which Jesus looks at this is very explicit. It's your own love of the ideal is first. So Jesus's love of God is like the primary kind of love. Your love of your own ideal is the starting point. And then you realize the other person also has that capacity, and the love between people comes as a result. It's like a concomitant of that. So in that sense, if I were to put it like love of ideal is over here, instead of ideal, I would say love of ideals. And this one is the love of the soul of other people,
Okay.
of love of somebody else doing exactly the same thing as that. So that's exactly how it is presented in the gospel, that this is the cause. So, and it's even kind of shown how it progresses. So Jesus says, I love my Father. I love you like I love my Father. And the interesting thing is that it is both ways, that it is like a two-way, it's like a reciprocal love, because it strengthens, each part strengthens the other and makes, so that's how it is. But excellent point. And it's absolutely consistent with what.
Awesome. I had one more
Sure.
point / question. So when I think of Moses, for me, Moses, of most all the other characters will come across in Bible, Moses brings to mind for me like trial and being tested. And I would like, I don't know, I somehow would like to see that somewhere in the Moses line. I'm not quite sure where. So for in the tree of responsibility, I wrote some of my own stuff, and I was thinking, when we're thinking Eden, that's more, it's outside. So the responsibility lies with God. These people are blissfully ignorant. When Adam now has taken of the tree of knowledge, he ate from the tree of knowledge, but he rejects the responsibility by saying, why'd you do this? But Moses, he had massive responsibility placed upon his shoulders, and it was a burden. It was a very heavy burden. So like, it would be like Adam rejected, but Moses was tested. And then with Jesus is where we find the redemption, right? So Jesus is, at least to my seeing, he would be the redemption. And then, we're talking the city of God is the integration of them both. So that gets me back. I keep going back to Moses because I feel like he's more the struggle, which I guess it makes some of the comments some other folks have said, I really, really am hearing them, the idea that most of us are probably sitting at Moses, but that's, so how do we convey this concept of, that's it. I don't know if outer is quite correct, at least not to me, because it's sitting on you. It was given to you from outside, but you have to wear it and walk with it in order to move forward.
Yeah, that's excellent. So first thing I would say is that I look forward to really expanding on my knowledge of this. Okay. Currently, my knowledge is very limited, but let me tell you what I know. Okay. And correct me if wherever I'm wrong. So this is trying to look at the time of Moses, of what, so the law, so there is two people involved here. There is Moses, who is taking the law from God. Now he has a connection to God. Okay, so, and then he is passing that law on to other people who have no connection to God. And he's saying, this is what you need to do. Okay. Now, he's carrying the burden for sure. But the biggest burden that he's carrying is that people he's dealing with actually have no connection with God. And at best, they will say that I'm afraid to transgress this law, so I will obey it out of fear. Now, compare that, the same issue with Jesus. What Jesus has is that he has love of God as opposed to the law. The law is simply, this is how you should act.
Fear,
just obey this, right? That's the tool that he has. That's the only tool that he has, that he's offering other people. Whereas what Jesus has is that he has love of God. And he's trying to transmit the love of God to other people so that they have a desire for the ideal, desire for the truth, desire for the good from the bottom of their heart. Now, as a result, working with such people is actually not a burden. Working with people who are going to be saying that, you know what, I want to do these other things, but because I'm afraid of this law, I will follow it. And so the burden is caused by the fact that people do not love the ideal, do not have that love of God in their own heart. So they don't have that going inside of them. And what Jesus has is that he's trying to impart that. So that's why the effects are very different. Does that address what you're saying?
I think so. I think I'm gonna.
Okay, that's the best.
There's no conflict. There's no conflict.
Right. That's the best I can do right now, Maritza. Next up is going to be Madho. Anybody else has comments or questions? Go ahead. I definitely want to hear from people what they got from it, because probably all of you know better than this material, better than I do. So Madho, go ahead.
I was also watching Jordan Peterson, and one of the comments that he made was that God said people of Israel are the chosen ones, and what Israel means is those who wrestle with God. Does this go back to the difference between Moses and Christ? That Moses, people that follow law, don't have the love to wrestle with God, so they obey, but the people that are in the ideal camp, they have that love to wrestle. Is that true? Is that right?
Exactly. So like the people in the Moses camp, they are afraid of transgressing the law. Therefore, they are following the law. They're also following the law in a way which is ritualistic. Okay, and this is kind of this is not really, it's not fair. It ended up being like that. So Moses himself is not like that at all. Okay, he has a direct connection with God. There are people in the beginning who would be following that, who would know all of that. But as time goes on, the law becomes ritualistic. And you can see examples of that in the Sabbath, in the New Testament. Whereas what is going on during the New Testament, what message that Jesus is communicating is that he's communicating the Holy Spirit. And Holy Spirit, as I understand it, is nothing but love of God. So he is saying, learn to love God. That's it. Learn to love the truth, learn to love the good. And that's the heart of the message. Next up is going to be Evanik, followed by Katie. Evanik.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that you asked was, where do we think we are in this table? And I think if I'm looking at myself, I would say I'm in the Jesus category, but not in the sense of perfection, obviously. But I think what I do is I try to look at it from like the material and spiritual. And I think it's also coming from studying the Tao and the Gita. I think, you take from the tree of life and the integration of spirit and matter for the individual, and the meaning is the ideal. And I think part of that is love. So I think I kind of agree with people that said that maybe love should be switched under Jesus, but I understand why you did it the way you did it, because if you're going the ideal, ultimately you're going for loving other people and seeing the God in other people, and other people seeing the God in you, and you seeing the God in yourself. So I think that's where I fall. I think for biblical aspects, yes, we focus on Jesus, but I think you could see this across different practices of spirituality. I won't say religions, different practices of spirituality. Somebody's looking for that integration between body and spirit, because they both are actually integrated together. We are a human body with matter, and we are a spirit. It's who we are. And until we pass away, that's who we will be. And then we will be fully spirit. So I just wanted to add that in.
Fantastic, fantastic observation. I fully agree. And I also agree that, see, what happens is that if you look at most people today, like the modern things is in this Moses, most people are in the Moses. Let me ask you that as a question. Forget about you. Like most people that you know, where would you put them?
That's a good question.
You can ponder about it, and you can, whenever you're ready, you can type an exclamation.
Yeah, let me ponder on that one.
Okay. I think that today, most of the world is somewhere between Moses and Adam. Lots of us are subjectivist and materialist. And there isn't enough of idealism in us, in most people. Okay. I certainly think that I have some idealism, more than most people that I know. And so that's one point. But I think most people, like if we are to look at it at a cultural level, they are subjectivist, people going by whims, which is the red, and people who are mostly focused on material things. And then there is so it's kind of combination of red, green, and blue. But the percentages, there are kind of percentages, and very few have the yellow part, and very few, relatively few, have the gray part, something like that. It's very like, but it's excellent, excellent question, where we are on this one, and where the culture is, and different cultures are at different places, and that has changed over time. So if you were to look at during Aquinas' time, it would be very different. So that's one. Second thing is that I agree that actually love belongs in the Jesus column, because God is love and Jesus is love. And this is like love which is flowing. This love that we're talking about, if we put love over here instead of ideal, this is the love, that is the connection that the Bhagavad Gita talks about between Atman and Brahman. So this is the core of you greeting the universe. That's the love that we're talking about. The love over here in the gray is, in Bhagavad Gita terms, it's the namaste. It's basically the divine spark in you, the God in you greeting the God in the other person. So this one, so if I had to use the Indian terms, the love over here in City of God is the namaste. That is what it is. And the ideal over here is what Indian in Bhagavad Gita is called Sthita Prajna. That means that you are constantly focused on God. That's what this is. Thank you. Great comments, Evanik. Next up is Katie, Brian, Nelson, and Abram. Katie.
I just had a short, small point to add into the Moses. I think we did this in the Nietzsche discussion. I think a lot of the 10 Commandments really are prohibitions. Like if you don't, like thou shalt not blank, don't do this, if that. So I think that that's different than like what you shouldn't do versus like what you should do. And then Jesus comes to tell us what we should do, which is love one another, not just like what we shouldn't be doing.
Excellent point. Absolutely true. The law is about doing no harm. and it is saying what we should not do. Whereas to say that love your neighbor as yourself, love one another, that's a positive thing. And that's exactly the difference between the green and the gray over here. Excellent point. Next up is going to be Brian, Abram, Evnik, and David. Brian.
So I have just two things that are related. The first one goes to this point that was discussed most recently. That the current culture is subjectivist and materialist, mostly. What I would add to that is that they are fearlessly subjectivist and materialist.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think that's important, because the question is, you asked, where does it fit in now? The community that is the city of God, or the church, the community that's formed on the basis of the love you identified, includes all of those who love God, and in that way are able to love each other. So it's a community that's defined solely on the basis of love. In the Moses, just again, these are very simplified, this my I don't know how to say it, but it's I'm really open to correction on this. But in the Moses group, in the Moses period that you've highlighted here, and you've talked about a period of time, I would say that in this period of time, the community that we're focusing on, the Jewish community, is not based on love. It is based on genetics. It's a nation. It's a predefined nation. And then Moses and the law and all that are trying to get them, if I might put it that way, to love each other. So it's the community is defined first, and then the attempt is to introduce the love of God in each other, whereas the other one starts with the love of God in each other, and that becomes a self-defining community. So, and that's where the fearlessness comes from, the subjectivist, current subjective materialists. They don't see themselves as being a part of the community of Moses, no predefined community. They're not a part of the idealistic and loving community either, as we've defined it. They're a member of the subjectivist materialist community, and they're a member of that community rather fearlessly.
Excellent point. Thank you, Brian. So I'll say a few things. Firstly, that's a very good identification. Part of it is that we are, I want to say many things. So firstly, I think it's very relevant that the Moses group, it is genetic. So it is based on you are either part of the tribe or you're not part of the tribe. And this applies only within the tribe. So in that sense, even the fear of outsiders is built into it. You're saying this is only for us. These other people are not part of that. And so that's thing. And I think you are onto something when you say that it's mostly this, and they're fearlessly so, because there's almost kind of like, I was doing a meetup on virtue, and somebody was saying, this is very odd. How come you're talking about virtue? Nobody's talking about virtue now. So it is very interesting that all of this part, the blue and gray, there isn't that much of it as it used to be. Like when you were studying all these three books, right? Tao Te Ching, the Bhagavad Gita, and Bible. I think there was more of this at that time. than is there now. So there is a lot. I really like your comments. I'm not doing justice to them. Next up is going to be Abram, followed by Evanik. Abram.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, Katie mentioned the Old Testament seems like prompted by fear, but the New Testament is prompted by love. Yeah, secondly, I shared biblical passages in my first remark, Romans chapter 5, which is New Testament and part of Samuel 15. So I'd like to read just a little bit more to give the background. This is talking about obedience again. First Samuel chapter 15, this is in the Old Testament, verse 22. Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice. So this is what the Lord God said. And also in New Testament, Matthew 11, chapter 11, verse 11, Jesus talking about John the Baptist. So this is what he said to Jesus. Truly I tell you, among those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet whoever is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. So basically, Jesus is saying John the Baptist, if you call it, the greatest so far. Why? Because he obeyed. So I think this is one of the way I look at the Old and New Testament. Old Testament seems like a mission, but New Testament, mission plus commission. So Old Testament treat us to some extent as a subject and creature, but New Testament is inviting us to partake in the God's grand design, which is redemption and salvation. So the Adam, as I said, I don't see him as a baby figure. I think if, I don't know, when I think about Adam, he was the first creature in the image of God. So I don't think God made first, this is my just only speculation, as like a very immature, probably very, very intelligent, very, very capable of so many things. But the key was he disobeyed. That's how I see it. Yeah, and now, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So a couple of things I want to pick up on, and that is, let me see, so firstly, Abram, thank you. Thank you very much for bringing all of this up. You know, we have to integrate the Old Testament and the New Testament. And the interesting thing I find is that there are concepts in the Old Testament that gets morphed differently in the New Testament. For example, sacrifice, right? Sacrifice in the Old Testament is generally external. You know, you are sacrificing a lamb, the blood, whereas sacrifice also gets kind of internalized. God is external. He's out there in the heaven, not reachable. Jesus is all about bringing the God within you through the sacrament, the bread of life. So it's like internalizing things which were external. So that's a very large theme that I see. Next up is going to be Evanik, followed by David Adelson. Evanik.
Yeah, so I did have a chance to ponder on where I think society is, and I think they're in the law in Moses, but I think if you look at the first one, I think it's in the sense that people are looking for outer influences to almost, it's like they're looking for approval from an outside world instead of looking for internal, which I think kind of puts responsibility going from the Adam part, like putting responsibility on other people to validate themselves. And I think that's just the way we've been taught and culturalized. And so I was thinking of that. And then I think this tree of spiritual life indirect, I think they think if I do good things, then I will be saved. Like if I do these outer things, I will be saved. And, I won't do bad things to people because I'm afraid it's going to come back on me. Not so much for love, but it's like other speakers were saying, it's out of fear. And I think we all have that, whether we have a spiritual practice or not. People sometimes act out of fear, like they won't do anything bad because they're afraid like it's going to come back on them, like somebody's going to get back at them, something of that nature. I think integration of spirit and matter is partial, but I think it's mostly matter. I don't think they really tap into their spirit, partly because I don't think they progress as far, because it takes a lot of work to progress to the spiritual level. And it takes a change, like it takes a physical change, which makes a lot of people uncomfortable in changing. And finally, with the meaning and the law, I think they use the law as meaning for their lives rather than looking for actual meaning in doing. So that's my response to that question.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Evanik. So now I'm going to go to two people, David Edelson and Katie. Then I have a question for all of you. I mean, the core point that I was, one of the things that I was talking about are my understanding of the two trees and the cross as being the combination of two trees. So the tree of, I'm calling it tree of responsibility and tree of spiritual life. What do you think about my characterization of both the trees? And what do you think about, the idea that Jesus on the cross is the combination of both these, of tree of responsibility and tree of spiritual life? Okay, so that will, as soon as both David Edelson and Katie, I'm going to open that up. So if you'd like to answer that, go ahead and type an exclamation mark. David Edelson.
Yes, Shukrant. I wanted to expand or comment on this whole conversation about love and bring it back that this concept of love is actually earlier in the Torah, in the Old Testament. I mean, we're discussing about that most of the laws or requests from God, or you can get back to the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, as being in the negative. But the primary thing that, or the only real request of God for himself, itself, not to be sacrilegious this way, is to love me. I mean, I think that's what Cheryl was mentioning. There is this concept, and this may be, I mean, I don't know about Hinduism, but it's sort of related to me like the Homa, I mean, the fire offering in Hinduism, where, as far as I've been able to just quickly sort of look, there's a lot of description about how to do it, what to do it, but there's no commandment or requirement of why. I mean, there's like description of, okay, you should do this. And it's the same in the Torah to a large extent about the sacrifice. There is a lot of question about why even Cain and Abel were sacrificing in Genesis, because that wasn't a law later on. And yes, there's a law saying the first animal of this should be sacrificed, and this is how you should do it, and you should burn it, and all the regulations, again, much the same way in Hinduism. But there isn't a specific request for God of, okay, it's like, well, if you're going to do it, this is how you should do it. But it's not a matter of, oh, I want this. Whereas the only statement in the Torah, and this is prior to Jesus, I mean, then you can say, I mean, this, is a foreshadowing of it. I mean, there's all the ways to connect this into the New Testament and Jesus, but that the statement from God, and the only statement, and again, we can get into David Miller's of exactly when books in the Torah were written, but we have the Torah as it is. It's a whole complete statement. That's what's come out of the history and evolved. It's a complete document, and we interpret it, at least in this context, as just the document it is, and not trying to pick it apart. It's the same way I was discussing earlier. And for what it is, the statement in there in, as we were discussing in the Ve'ahavta and this final in Deuteronomy, the statement from God, I mean, that Moses, communicates is, you shall love me. That is the only statement. It's not, God doesn't say you shall worship me. God doesn't say you shall make sacrifices. I mean, I said, okay, you're going to make sacrifices, or this is what I want from a sacrifice, but it doesn't say I want it. It says you shall love me. I mean, so that's, can sort of bring back again in the, as Jesus is God, so you can say that again, this is foreshadowing, and this isn't, Moses doesn't claim to be God, and this is the difference between the humans in the Torah versus God in the Torah. But the statement from God is that love existed all the way back, that it's an ideal, or it's a statement of what God and the Hebrew Bible aspires to as an ideal at that point in time, and what his ideal future, or what he wants as the ideal relationship with the people and human beings, much the way that the city of God in your statement. So it's consistent that way. And again, that's why I'm saying it's a little bit, it pervades even in the Old Testament.
Excellent point, David. I mean, I think, several things. The thing is, that is something that I know I'm very weak on. And I know that there is parallels, that the Old Testament is version 1 and this is version 2. The emphasis is different, and I'm reacting mostly to the emphasis, but I'm also know for sure of what you're saying, that things like God saying, love me, that is there in the Old Testament. So there is a correspondence between, it's the same God. It's like there is a continuation between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And, I'm just trying to do a very quick take on the Old Testament, knowing that I don't know as much. So I don't know that I'm doing enough justice to it. And I know that there is enormous complexity to it. So all your points are really well taken. Thank you very much. Next up is Katie, followed by Evanique. Katie.
I'm going back to what Evanique was saying, and this was something I was thinking about during the week, because Jordan Peterson talked about abstraction, but he talked about abstraction towards a God figure, and I think that the same thing's true for punishment. Doesn't make that it might be like, well, I don't want to give that person feedback because they'll get back to me. They'll get back at me somehow. They'll avoid me. They'll start a rumor behind my back. So that kind of that idea of like punishment, I do something and then you might pay me back for it in a negative way, is also interesting to look at.
Excellent. Thank you. So folks, now the comments on the 2 trees. Any thoughts on the 2 trees? Let's start with Evanique.
Okay, so the thought on the 2 trees coming together in the cross, I can see that. I think the tree of responsibility, I think if you look at Adam, he doesn't take any responsibility for his actions, where Jesus is like the polar opposite in that he takes responsibility for all of our actions on the cross. But I think he leaves us with this responsibility. He leaves human beings with the responsibility of repenting and going forth and sinning no more, or loving people, loving others in the same way that he loves us. And he leaves us that commandment. And I know in the Old Testament, it says, love your neighbor as yourself. And this is progression, because he's saying, love others as I have loved you. And that holds us to a higher standard. So the tree of responsibility is now being placed on human beings. He's taking the responsibility for our sins, but we have a responsibility to live according to the way Christ teaches us. And I think in the tree of spiritual life, Adam didn't have it because he didn't obey God and he wanted the glory for himself. And it says in the Bible that he was there when Eve ate the apple. So he was right there, again, he was, I like the analogy of the 2-year-old. He was there being a 2-year-old. God told him not to do it. He chose to do it anyway. And then was like, I don't want to take responsibility for it. Right. And then Jesus, being the tree of spiritual life, he said yes to obeying God, even until death, even until a horrible death. He went. And I know in other meetups, some people were saying it's cruel that Jesus had to take on the crucifixion for our sins. And I see that point, but I think he was showing us that, part of this is going to be painful. Like when you're going through spiritual growth, it's painful because you have to, in a sense, die to the old self in order to become a new self. You have to, and I'm trying to think of a good way to explain it, but you have to like when you want to respond to somebody that says something negative about you, let's just use that as a simple example. When somebody says something negative or somebody does something that you don't like, and you have a choice now, you know which way to respond. You can respond the way that you would before you knew Christ and before you pursued this spiritual path, or you can respond the way Christ wants you to. And it can be very painful to do that. But if you're taking on spiritual growth, that's what you do, because it affects you when you react negatively to something. And it doesn't mean it's not standing up for yourself, because we can see several examples in the Bible where Jesus does that. It's the way in which you do that. And is it in a way that sees God in the other person, or is it in a way that just gives you gratification because you got back with that other person? So I think that's the way I think the cross is the tree of responsibility and the tree of spiritual life coming together as one.
Beautifully put. Thank you, Evanik. That was just excellent. Thank you. Next up is Maritza, followed by Mike. Maritza.
I view them as different phases in the life of a same tree. If I were looking, like, if you have, we're talking the tree of responsibility, the tree of spirituality, and it's the tree of life. And you're talking about spirit, matter, integration. And if I take a step back and I consider that all of these things, this is a philosophy, and these are, ancient kind of guiding paths for, how to live life, how to walk that meaningful path. We see that the tree, the symbology of the tree it's the spring, the fall, the winter, the summer. You have at different times in your life where you struggle with responsibility. And sometimes you struggle with spirituality. And sometimes you struggle with the fact that it's not either or, that you need to hold on to both and embrace both. And sometimes we're looking at those myopically, and we forget that if there's no meaning, then none of it makes any sense. And so I view it as just different phases of the same tree, because in that way, it's a reminder to me that they don't actually exist apart. In fact, they cannot exist apart, because I don't believe they can. If we're looking at this as a philosophy and where we are here, just because we're at one point, it doesn't mean that nothing of any of the other points exist within us, because you even said it. You said all of this does already exist within us. It's just where we happen to be in this moment. We either cannot see or cannot access the other. And it's like, when the tree loses its leaves in the fall and goes dormant then in the winter, it's not dead, even if it has the appearance. There's still life, it just looks different, and it's serving a different purpose. So that's kind of how I would view these two trees. Thanks.
Wonderful. So let me continue the metaphor here. The tree of responsibility is like tree going through the winter. It is shedding things. It is, it's fall and winter is what the tree of responsibility is. It's shedding things that are no longer working. It is living through the pain of having to give that up and living through very hard times. And the tree of spiritual life is the spring and then full blossoming in the summer. And those are connected that way. Unless you're ready to go through the winter of giving up things that you need to give up, material things that are not pointing towards towards your goal, you can't blossom, in summer. Another way of looking at it is that Jesus calls himself the bread of life. And that is the analogy of that is a wheat, seed. He's the seed. The seed has to die so that it springs as another being and produces all the, amazing variety into. Yeah.
Funny little thing, Shrikant, there actually exists a tree that produces fruit called breadfruit. And so it's fascinating. And it grows, this tree is interesting because it grows separate trunks. So it looks like it's multiple trees, but it's one tree with these giant fruit. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's exactly. Next up is going to be Mike, Abram, and Cheryl. Mike.
Hi. Of course, we had the original statement that Adam God created the original sin by eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and Christ redeemed that by his crucifixion. Now, there's several things that go on here that the vertical plank in the tree represents points at heaven, and the horizontal plank represents the human. So it's a meeting at the center point of the divine in the human heart. And there's several things that come out of that. The Byzantine cross, the Eastern Orthodox cross, has additional bars across it. And they have meaning that the endpoints represent on the left side evil and on the right side good. And on the right side of the top bar represents wisdom. And there's each of the endpoints is added. And at the base of the skull and at the base of the cross, in some artist renditions that came out of the Middle Age, there's a skull, and that portrays the thing that you said of the seed of the wheat has to be buried and die in order to give the harvest in the fall. And each of the elements of the cross has been discussed as meaning. Now, originally, in the time of Jesus, the cross was considered kind of a disgrace and for thieves, and it was a pope in the 4th century had a revelation speaking from his author of his throne that glorified the cross and gave it a lot of its symbolism, some of which, a fraction of that of which I stated now. The Byzantine cross has further definition. So thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. That was just incredible. Next up is Cheryl, followed by Abram. Cheryl.
I'm just going to say a couple things because I got so much out of this already. And just the idea, I think you already mentioned this, Shrikant, about the fruit being God made, but being ingested by Adam so that he could take in the knowledge, and that was a bad thing. So he would know evil and he would have free will and he would be able to make his own choices, but not understanding the ramifications of that. And prior to that, you know, he was basically created to be a king. He was created to be, to rule over all the plants and animals on the earth, but he didn't really know how to be a king. And thus he made a mistake. And then Jesus says, I am the bread of life. And the bread being ingested is taking in the good of Jesus. But it's man-made. The bread is man-made. I didn't realize it was a bread fruit tree, but we think of the bread as being man-made. And also the difference between, you know, being able to see the evil tree in the world everywhere. It's so easy to see the evil. And we have the knowledge of good and evil, although sometimes it's very difficult to figure out the difference between good and evil. But the tree of life, the tree of truth, is hidden. We know it's good, we know it's there, but because of the fall, the truth is hidden, and we have to work, we have to toil for our food, and by the sweat of our brow, we must try extra hard to see God in the world, and to see the spirituality, and to see the God in others. That's all I want to say.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl. I want to elaborate on the fruit. The fruit is a result of a tree. And what Adam does is that he takes the result of a tree and ingests it. Jesus says that he is the vine. He's the tree that produces all the fruits. That's the difference. It is, you have to, taking the responsibility is not about consuming what has been produced, but of actually creating things. So I think that's very deep. I also like the bread of life, the idea. This, like, first time I read it in Aquinas, really blew me away. That when you consume the fruit just became part of Adam. Whereas Jesus, as a bread of life, you become the bread. You become Jesus. So it's a way that what you're ingesting is transforming you into that. Next up is going to be Abram, followed by Mike. Abram.
What I'm about to read is, I think, related to to what Cheryl just said, truth hidden. At the same time, this passage is talking about eternity for humanity, how much we long for it. This is from Ecclesiastes, Old Testament, chapter 3:11. God has made everything beautiful in his time, and God has put eternity in people's hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. This is from Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5. Before I means God, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. So let me talk briefly about the tree of life first. I think we have heart, like the scripture says, we have a heart. We know there is something beyond our physical world or mortality, which is eternity. Yeah, that's what I see here. Secondly, regarding the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So in the gospel, in the New Testament, the one man is demon possessed, and then Jesus drive out, and the demons listened back Jesus. We know who you are. Please don't do anything. We don't. Basically, they were afraid of Jesus and let us go into swine. So Jesus allowed that the swine rush it into the cliff and they drowned. So what I'm saying is, knowing is not enough. Even evil Satans, they know who Jesus was, who God is. I think humans, we, including me, we knows not everything, but certain things at times. But I think again, I think it's might be going back to the how much are we willing to obey? Yeah. So knowledge, the concept of knowledge is not here. I think it's here. The eye of a heart and also the action we are willing to take, believing in God and keeping on, perseverance, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you, Abram. That point about knowledge is very much true. I think that knowledge as it's conceived in the modern Western context is actually very different from the knowledge that these people are talking about. And this is true of Bhagavad Gita. Of yesterday, we were talking about, on Friday, we were talking about the knowledge as seen in Bhagavad Gita. And here we are talking about the word, that Jesus in the beginning was the word, and word was with God. What is that word? So that word is the ideal. Word is knowledge. It captures the truth. It is the ideal, and it can only be expressed through action. And it has to produce a certain emotion. So it is this integrated thing of reason, emotion, action, and spirit, all in one, is what is talked about. The same thing is true in Bhagavad Gita. When they're talking about knowledge, they're talking about self-knowledge, knowledge of the spirit that allows you to act in that way. When we're talking about Tao Te Ching, the knowledge there, knowledge of the Tao, is the of the Tao. That means following the way of the Tao. It is morality and knowledge all integrated. Thank you, Abram. Next up is Douglas, followed by Mike. Douglas, what do you think about the concepts of the tree of life and tree of knowledge?
Here's the whole thing, okay, in a nutshell. And what I teach this thing is that, okay, you will never get it on an intellect. You can try to get the thing on an intellectual understanding, but it's emotionally, it has to sink in so that we get it in a, what it's saying, okay? It's personal for us to be able to understand what is being said, okay? And get it, but if you try to get it from an intellectual level, you ain't going to get it. You've got to get it through an emotional level where it becomes a part of you. And that's the only way you're going to get these messages. And it's all personal of your own, how you feel in so many ways. So that's what I'm mentioning.
Thank you, Douglas. Next up is going to be Mike. Mike, go ahead.
There's another instance of the tree of life, which comes from, of all places, the Bhagavad Gita. And it's a tree that grows upside down from heaven. Now, before you start smiling, they use that as a common point to tie Christianity through Zoroaster to to Hinduism and the Eastern religions. I first heard that from somebody in Australia named David Miller, who is probably can expand on that because he's kind of an expert on Zoroastrianism.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too many religions mixed up and too many different, different approaches, because what happens is that the distinction between this kind of Aristotelian way of thinking and the Platonic way of thinking is far more fundamental than the names of religion, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Mike, your comments today have been amazing. Really appreciate you providing all of this. Okay, so final chance if anybody wants to talk about how was this presentation? Was it clear? Was it how did you get something from it? I have no good concept of evaluating this thing because this is so new to me. Did you learn something new? Was this something that is conventional wisdom? What did you think of the presentation? So any comments about the presentation as a whole? Evanique.
I thought it was great. I think it helped. I think it helps bridge the Old and the New Testament, and you can see the progression of spiritual growth, and you can apply this to any spiritual practice. So thank you.
Wonderful. All right, folks, thank you very much. And thank you, Mike. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, David. Everything. I'm glad everybody enjoyed it, and I will see you soon. Bye.